My name is Claire. People always told me that family is the one thing you can count on when the world turns its back. But nobody warned me about what to do when your family is the one doing the turning. My cousin humiliated me at the most important night of my career. She stood at a podium, under $10,000 worth of crystal lighting, holding an award that had my fingerprints all over it, and she thanked everyone in the room except me. And the only person who said something about it wasn't even invited to the same table. Was that justice? Or was it just the first time in 29 years that someone decided I was worth defending? I've been asking myself that question since March. Since the night, everything cracked open in front of 200 people and a room full of cameras. Let me start where it actually started. Not at the gala, not even close. My mother's sister married well. That was the family line, delivered at every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every graduation party where my aunt floated in wearing something silk and my uncle shook hands like he was running for office. Their daughter, my cousin, grew up inside that particular kind of confidence that comes not from earning things, but from never being told no. She was 2 years older than me, perpetually polished, and had learned very early that rooms tend to rearrange themselves around people who act like they belong at the center. I was not that kind of person. I was the one who stayed late, who read the footnotes, who kept color-coded notebooks and triple-checked citations and emailed professors at 11 at night with follow-up questions nobody else thought to ask. By the time I was 26, I had a master's in biochemistry and a research position at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company in Chicago, working on a patient outcomes protocol that my supervisor called, quietly, one of the more elegant frameworks she'd seen in years. I didn't repeat that compliment to anyone. I wasn't sure I believed it yet. My cousin had a communications degree and a LinkedIn profile that read like a novel. For most of my adult life, we existed in separate lanes. Holidays, the occasional birthday, a wedding here and there. She kissed my cheek and asked how the lab was going, and I smiled and said fine, and we both moved on to the next conversation. I thought that was the natural order. I thought distance was just what happened when two people had nothing to compete over. I was wrong about that. The year I turned 28, my company announced a new research partnership with Webb Biomedical, one of the largest clinical development firms in the country. The partnership came with a 3-year funding grant and, more importantly, an invitation to present original research at the National Clinical Innovation Awards the following spring. Our company's vice president of research called a small team together to discuss who would lead the presentation. I had been working on a clinical trial protocol for early detection of treatment-resistant depression for 14 months. The data was mine. The model was mine. The methodology had already been submitted to 2 peer-reviewed journals. My supervisor nominated me without hesitation. What I didn't know was that my cousin had recently started a communications consulting contract with our company's external PR firm, a 6-month engagement to help shape the narrative around the partnership launch. I also didn't know that she had asked to be included in our research team's briefing sessions, on the grounds that she needed to understand the science to communicate it effectively. I said yes when my supervisor asked if I was comfortable with it. My cousin sat in on 4 meetings. She took notes. She asked smart questions, the kind that made her sound like she understood more than she did. She was good at that. In January, 4 months before the awards gala, my supervisor called me into her office with a look I had never seen on her face before, something between confusion and controlled anger. She slid a printed document across the desk. It was a 30-page research brief. My research brief. My data, my language, my framework, restructured slightly. A few sentences rearranged. My name nowhere on it. The author line read my cousin's name. The document had been submitted directly to Webb Biomedical's partnership committee 2 weeks earlier through my cousin's consulting firm as part of a preliminary collaboration proposal. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I felt something cold and precise move through my chest, the way a draft moves through a house when someone opens a window in winter. I recognized the specific section where she had changed the most. It was the patient intake model, the part I had built from scratch after 18 months of reviewing case studies. She had rephrased 3 paragraphs and added a single new header. Everything else was mine, word for word. My supervisor told me she had already flagged it internally and was waiting on legal. She told me not to confront my cousin directly until the company had documented everything properly. I drove home that night without the radio on. I sat in my parking garage for 9 minutes before I could move. Not because I was devastated, although I was, but because I was trying to understand how I had handed someone that kind of access and not seen what was coming. I thought about all the times I had explained my research to her at those briefing sessions, simplifying it, making it accessible, being generous with the details, because I thought I was helping. I thought about how she had laughed once and said, "You make this stuff sound almost interesting, Claire," which I had taken as a compliment. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I started typing every date, every meeting, every email I could remember. I worked for 2 hours in that parking garage. Then I went upstairs and kept going. The legal process moved slowly. Company attorneys and HR and documentation reviews, and carefully worded emails that said very little. My cousin, when contacted, apparently responded that she had simply helped organize and present existing materials, that the framing of the research brief was her communications contribution, that she had not understood the boundary between content and presentation. I will say this: she was very good at sounding reasonable. What the legal team did confirm was that Webb Biomedical's partnership committee had reviewed her submission separately from mine, which had gone through proper channels weeks later, and that because of the way the consulting arrangement was structured, the overlap had created what the attorneys called an ambiguous attribution situation. I called it something else. What I did not know, in those months of documentation and careful silence, was that someone at Webb Biomedical had noticed the overlap too. The awards gala was held at the Grand Hyatt in downtown Chicago on a Saturday evening in late March. The National Clinical Innovation Awards were a real event, not enormous but well attended, the kind of gathering where the right handshake could open a year's worth of doors. My company had purchased a table. My cousin's consulting firm had also purchased a table. Nobody had thought to mention that to me, or if they had thought about it, they had decided it wasn't their problem to solve. I wore a navy dress. Not flashy, not stiff. Something I had bought for myself at a department store clearance rack 6 months earlier and hung in my closet, waiting for an occasion that felt like it deserved it. I had straightened my hair. I wore my grandmother's earrings, small freshwater pearls, the kind that don't ask for anything from the room. When I arrived, the venue was already filling. Round tables with white linens, name cards, small centerpieces made of white orchids, the kind of event where everything is elegant and nothing is warm. I found my table near the middle of the room. My supervisor was already seated. 2 colleagues from the lab. 2 people from business development I recognized by face, but not by name. I sat and let the noise settle around me, and told myself I was fine. I was fine. The program began at 7. Cocktails had already softened the room, and the MC moved through the early awards quickly, polished remarks, applause, photography. I ate the salmon. I listened. When the category for clinical research innovation came up, I felt my supervisor's hand brush my forearm under the table. Not a gesture of comfort. A gesture that said, "Hold on." The MC described the award. Outstanding contribution to research methodology in a collaborative clinical setting. Then she read the name. My cousin's name. The room applauded. I watched her rise from a table near the front, in a red dress that caught the light exactly the way she had intended it to. She walked to the stage the way she walked everywhere, like she had rehearsed the geography in advance. She accepted the award from the presenter, held it in both hands, smiled at the audience. She thanked her team at the consulting firm. She thanked the partnership committee at Webb Biomedical. She thanked the company, my company, for the opportunity to contribute to something meaningful. She did not say my name. I sat very still. She talked for 4 minutes about the power of translating complex science into human stories, about how communication is its own form of research, about how she hoped this work would open doors for other women trying to find their place in the clinical space. 4 minutes. I counted. Afterward, during the break before the final awards, she moved through the room the way people do when they've just been validated in public. Handshakes, photographs, small conversations that she controlled by positioning herself at their center. I watched from my seat. I had not moved. My supervisor leaned over. "Do you want to leave?" I shook my head. And then my cousin saw me. She crossed the room with her award tucked under one arm, and that particular smile on her face, the one that widened right before she said something she had already decided not to be sorry for. "Claire," she said, touching my shoulder like we were happy to see each other. "I didn't know you were coming." I looked up at her. I didn't stand. I said, "It's a company table." She glanced around the table briefly, then back at me. Her smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "You know," she said, lowering her voice just enough to suggest intimacy, "I really do think you should consider moving toward the communications side of things. The lab is great, but you have a way of explaining things that people actually respond to. You could have a real future in it." It was the most graceful insult I had ever received. I said, "I'm good where I am." She tilted her head. "You always undersell yourself. That's your problem. You do all this work, and then you just—" She paused, let it sit there. She shrugged one shoulder. "Some people aren't built for the spotlight. That's not a bad thing. Not everyone needs to be in the front of the room." I held her gaze. I didn't answer. She reached out and straightened the edge of my dinner plate with 2 fingers, a small adjustment, unnecessary, deliberate. Then she said, "Softer now, almost gentle. You should think about that." She turned to leave. She took 2 steps, and then a voice from behind her said, "Actually, I've been looking forward to meeting the person who built the intake model." The voice was quiet, not loud, not theatrical, but the kind of quiet that carries across a room when it needs to. He was standing at the edge of our table, one hand in the pocket of a dark suit, the other holding a glass of water he wasn't drinking. I recognized him from the company briefing documents. Marcus Webb, CEO of Webb Biomedical. 40, maybe 42. The kind of face that had learned to be patient. My cousin turned. He was looking at me. He extended his hand in my direction. "Claire Mercer," he said. It wasn't a question. I stood. I shook his hand. "Yes," I said. He nodded once, then looked briefly at my cousin. His expression didn't shift. It didn't need to. The shift was already in the physics of who he had walked toward. He said to her, "The submission your firm sent over in January was interesting. Parts of it were very good. But the intake model had some details that were," he paused, "quite specific. Our science team spent some time on it, and they kept noting how unusual the sourcing structure was." My cousin said, "Right. I put that together from a range of—" He interrupted her, not rudely, simply as a matter of fact. We ran a document comparison with the materials submitted through the company's official research channel. 2 weeks later, he looked at me then. "Your submission." Silence settled over our table like a cloth being laid flat. My cousin said, "I don't think this is the place." "It became this place," he said, when the award was announced tonight. "I want to be clear. Webb Biomedical does not intend to move forward with the consulting arrangement under the current attribution structure. And I'd like to sit down with you," he said to me, "at your convenience, to talk about the research properly." People at the neighboring tables had stopped pretending not to listen. A woman near the pillar had her phone at a low angle that suggested she was either texting or doing something else with it entirely. My cousin's voice came back, steadier now, recalibrated. "This is a misunderstanding. I contributed significantly to the framing." He turned toward her one final time. "The award is the event organizer's decision, and I have no part in it, but our partnership is ours, and we're careful about who we build with." He said it without cruelty. He said it the way someone says a thing that is simply finished. She stood there for a moment, polished, composed, nowhere to move. Then she walked back to her table. Marcus Webb turned to me. "I apologize for doing this in public." "It wasn't my plan for the evening," I said. "It's all right," he said. "I meant what I said about sitting down. The framework you built is genuinely good work. We'd like to talk about a real collaboration, with your name attached to it." I said, "I'd like that." He gave a brief nod, said he would have his office reach out Monday, and moved on to another part of the room. No theater, no further comment. I sat back down. My supervisor reached over and put her hand over mine on the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. I didn't cry until I got home. Not from sadness. From something I didn't have the right word for yet, something that felt like a long-held breath finally released. I stood in my kitchen in my navy dress with my grandmother's earrings still in, and I cried for about 4 minutes. Then, I washed my face, changed into sweatpants, and sat on my couch with a glass of water and my notes app open. I started writing down what I wanted the next 6 months to look like. Monday came. His assistant called at 9:15. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. In between, the noise arrived in pieces. My aunt called on Tuesday. Her voice was different than I expected, quieter, a little uncertain. She said she had heard about what happened at the gala from a mutual friend who'd been in the room. She said she needed to tell me something. She said that she had known, in a loose way, that my cousin was working with materials from my research, and that she had told herself it was a collaboration, that cousins share things, that it was probably fine. She said she had told herself that until Saturday night, when apparently fine no longer applied. I listened. I didn't fill the silence for her. She said she was sorry. Not for her daughter exactly, but for her own silence. For deciding it wasn't her place, she said. You always deserved more credit than this family gave you, Claire. From the beginning, I said. I know. She cried a little. I held the phone and let her. After we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window for a while, watching the street below. It was a gray April morning, the kind where the light never quite decides what it's doing. I thought about all the years I had been the one who accepted the smaller serving without saying anything. The conferences where my cousin mentioned she was in communications, and people's eyes brightened with interest, while mine went flat with recognition of another word I'd have to define. The family dinners where my work was summarized as something with science and hers was described as strategy and influence, and she always seemed to occupy more of the table somehow, even when she arrived late. I had not been blind to it. I had just decided it was mine to manage alone. That turned out to be the mistake. Not the silence itself, but the belief that it was protecting anyone. Thursday's meeting was in Webb Biomedical's Chicago office, 32nd floor, a room with a long table and a view of the lake that made the city look small and deliberate. Marcus Webb was already there when I arrived, along with 2 members of his science partnerships team. A research director named James, and a woman named Sandra, who had apparently been the one to first flag the document discrepancy. He stood when I came in. He introduced everyone. He offered me coffee. The whole thing felt like the beginning of something real, not a performance of business, just actual work. He said, "Before we talk about the research, I want to say something directly. What happened at the gala was not how I intended to handle this. I had scheduled a meeting with the partnership committee for the following week to address the attribution issue formally. Saturday night accelerated things. He looked at me evenly. I wanted to be transparent about that. I said I appreciated it. He said, I also want to be honest that we don't make partnership decisions based on public moments. We make them based on the work. And the work is strong. Sandra opened a folder and slid it toward me. She had annotated the document comparison in 3 colors: blue for my original language, green for structural changes, red for additions that were entirely my cousin's contribution. The red sections were thin. We spent the next 2 hours going through the framework. James asked real questions, the kind that challenged sections I had flagged as provisional, and I answered directly, including twice, when I said I wasn't sure yet, and here's what I would need to know to be sure. Sandra wrote things down. Marcus mostly listened, and occasionally asked a question that was so specific, I realized he had read my full submission carefully before the meeting. By the time we finished, there was a clarity in the room that felt earned. Marcus said his team would circulate a formal partnership proposal within 10 days, that my company's legal team would be involved, that the attribution on all published materials going forward would reflect the actual source of the research. I said, What about the award? He said, That's between you and the event organizers. I have no jurisdiction over what was announced, but I can tell you that the nomination our committee submitted, the one that went through your company's official channel, named you. What happened on the awards side of it, he paused, is worth looking into. I did look into it. My supervisor helped. What we found was that a member of the awards committee had received the consulting firm's submission first, had taken it at face value, and had moved it forward without cross-referencing the company research channel. An honest procedural failure, or something close to it. The organizing committee sent me a letter 6 weeks later. It acknowledged the attribution error. It offered me a formal recognition at the following year's event. It was, as these things go, the best outcome a letter could offer. I accepted it. Not because it felt like enough, but because I had stopped measuring my work in what other people handed me. In May, Web Biomedical announced a new research collaboration, press release, company website, the firm's newsletter. My name was in the first paragraph. The intake model was described in detail, including its development timeline, which happened to make the chronology of what my cousin had submitted quite clear to anyone who was reading carefully. She never called me. I did not call her. My mother asked me, once, whether I thought we could move past it as a family. She used that phrase, move past it, the way people do when they want forgiveness to happen quickly and quietly, before anyone has to sit with what occurred. I said, I don't know yet. I said it honestly. She didn't push. I think she could hear in my voice that I wasn't being cold. I was just not ready to manage other people's comfort before I'd finished processing my own. What I did instead of that conversation was go back to work. I worked on the second phase of the depression protocol. I had a standing call with Sandra at Web Biomedical every other Tuesday. I started mentoring a first-year researcher at my company named Priya, who reminded me of myself in a way I found both tender and uncomfortable. She apologized too much. She preemptively shrank herself in meetings. I watched her do it and recognized every gesture, and I started gently naming it when I saw it. Not cruelly, just clearly. You just did the thing where you said sorry before someone disagreed with you. I told her once after a team meeting, you don't have to apologize for your data. She looked at me. Then she wrote something in her notebook. I didn't know what she wrote, but I saw her in a meeting 3 weeks later, and she presented her findings without apologizing once. The gala was in March. By August, I was in a different place, in a way that was hard to explain to people who hadn't watched it happen from the inside. I still thought about the award sometimes. Not with bitterness, exactly, more with a kind of sad clarity about how easily the wrong name can end up on the right work when the systems assume good faith and nobody is watching. I thought about all the other Claires in other industries and other companies who never got a Marcus Webb standing at the edge of a table at the right moment. That wasn't lost on me. I wrote something about it. Not for publication, just for myself. About the systems that allow attribution to slip. About what it costs women specifically to be generous with their expertise in collaborative spaces, and how that generosity gets read as permission rather than trust. I sent it to Sandra, just to have sent it somewhere. She wrote back 3 sentences. The last one said, you should submit this somewhere. I did. A trade journal accepted it 6 months later. It ran under my full name. My cousin's consulting contract with our company's PR firm was not renewed when it expired in October. I was not involved in that decision. I don't know who was. But I heard about it through the department head in a casual way, the way you hear about things that have already become administrative detail. I bought myself a small thing the week the collaboration was officially announced. Not the pearls, not champagne, nothing theatrical. I went to a bookshop on Michigan Avenue on a Wednesday afternoon, and I bought myself 3 books I had been meaning to read for 2 years and hadn't let myself get to yet. I took them home and put them on my nightstand like a promise. That night I sat by my window with the first book open in my lap and didn't read it for a while. I just sat there. I thought about something Marcus had said during our second meeting, offhand, almost to himself. He had said that the most undervalued asset in any research environment is the person who does the work and doesn't need to be noticed doing it, because those are usually the people who actually finish it. I didn't know if that was true universally, but I knew it had been true for me in ways I had spent years misreading as a limitation. Being quiet was never the problem. Being quiet while assuming someone else was keeping the record, that was the problem. I had kept my own record. That was what saved it. I opened the book. The last thing I'll say is this. My aunt sent me a card in September. A real card, handwritten, with a stamp that had a bird on it. She said she had watched me handle everything with more grace than she would have managed. She said she hoped the family could earn its way back to me. She said she was proud of me, which was not a thing she had ever said to me before. I put the card in the wooden box where I keep things I want to be able to find again. Not everything gets repaired. Not everything should be. But some things can be held without being carried, set down without being buried, acknowledged without being relitigated into the ground. My name is Claire. I built something real. Someone tried to attach their name to it. And for a while it worked, until it didn't. And the difference between those two things came down to records I kept for myself, when I still believed no one else was watching. Turns out, someone always is. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know in the comments. Have you ever had your work taken without credit? What did you do? And if you haven't subscribed yet, there are more stories like this one waiting. Some of them might feel a little too familiar. That's the point.